records and retention management and email moving forward. So we're not going to spend too much time on that, but there does tends to be an overlay within our organization of some of these classic areas of discomfort for organizations. So content lifecycle management to provide an underpinning of records management, archiving, et cetera, for the organization, and then snap-on applications on top of that to do things like managing your email and monitoring the amount of email that's going through the organization, file server archiving to manage content that has been legacy on file servers, and then things like extended ECM for SAP, content lifecycle management for SharePoint, Enterprise Connect to manage content moving forward, all of these moving towards reducing the volume of content with the organization. What we're going to be looking at today is some of the capabilities around early case assessment and the capacity to be able to work with content wherever it might live in the organization. And then, as I mentioned, we're fully integrated with an application called Accelerate Legal Review as well. So just sort of that was a quick overlay of what organizations are looking to do. The goal is to reduce e-discovery costs and risks and storage costs. The goal is to reduce the amount of content that's going to be reviewed and make sure that it's more efficient as well. And what we're really seeing is that the records management and retention management is a long-term strategic solution. Everybody is beginning to look at it, realizing they need to get their houses in order. But at the same time, obviously, insourcing some of these e-discovery activities tends to be a much more immediate and tactical, I want to say tactical strategy, but that doesn't make much sense. But definitely a strategy they're looking to, over a very short period of time, reduce their risks and costs. So when we want to talk about e-discovery in the enterprise, first and foremost, you mentioned how important it is to get the legal hold process under control. So when it comes to e-discovery and getting litigation holds under control, the ECM system provides that capability to place content on litigation hold immediately, lock it down, and to continue to gather content that should be placed on litigation hold moving forward. However, one of the sort of second tenet is that, unfortunately, I guess, for a lot of organizations that are just embarking on records management and retention management programs, a huge amount of their content lives outside of the ECM system as well. So we need tools to be able to actually reach out, find content wherever it might be, whether it's desktops, file servers, live email systems, et cetera, to be able to actually look for that content and collect it back in a defensible manner as well. And then finally, in doing all this, we need to be able to, as I mentioned, reduce the amount of content that has to be sent for review. So culling the content as we collect it, culling it prior to export, and quite honestly, importantly, is the capability to be able to further reduce costs through processing the content prior to sending it for review. So we're going to be taking a very, very brief look at early case assessment today, but wanted to give you kind of an overview of how it works. Early case assessment is for those people on the line that are actually know the open text products, content server, or formerly known as LiveLink, is integrated with early case assessment but not dependent on it. And what we can do is with early case assessment, we can go reach out, index content wherever it might live. As I mentioned, desktops, email, SharePoint, and the content in the ECM suite. Any content that's on litigation hold can be further searched using early case assessment to ensure that we can pull information from all of these areas together based on the search parameters that legal is looking for, to be able to collect that content in a defensible manner and eventually cull it and process it, send it out for review. And I just wanted to give you kind of a basic process overview of what it takes from a legal hold perspective when we're actually looking for content. So what we typically see is that when a case comes in, the first thing that legal wants to do is assess the key custodians, understand who are the owners of the information that is going to be pertinent to the case. Very often it's in discussion, in cooperation, hopefully, with opposing counsel to determine who has that information and really to interview them and work with them to determine their relevant data sources, where their information is. Obviously to communicate with them and let them know that they're on litigation hold, but at the same time interviewing them and understanding where their information is means that you have the capacity to go out and look for information that's relevant to the case. What we would typically do at that point is using early case assessment gives us the ability to assess the case much earlier than what has been typically possible in the past. It allows us to understand what's out there, do some fact-finding and actually look around for smoking guns or silver bullets. Allows us to do some reporting on the amount of content that's out there. So how much content are we looking at? Is it 100 megabytes, or is it 10 terabytes of content that's likely to be associated to this case? And from that, we can do essentially the definition of early case assessment is what are the merits of the case? Are we likely to win? Are we likely to lose? How are we going to proceed with this case? And at the same time, how much is it going to cost, so that we can actually make a determination? What's the best way to proceed? The cost-benefit analysis needs to be looked at to decide to move on. And when we do move on, we do have the capacity to apply a litigation hold to the content, collect it back into a centralized location to protect the organization from the risks of spoliation of the content by mistake or on purpose as well. Prior to eventually sending it out, what we want to do is cull it, hopefully prioritize it, and categorize the content prior to review, giving organizations the ability to look at different vendors for some of their review, as an example, is a really good way of continuing to manage cost, to eventually get to the point where we're exporting load files to send to a review application. So I'm going to take this opportunity now to do a very brief demonstration of some of the key features of early case assessment. You guys can forgive me for a second as I switch over applications. I'd certainly like to hear from the rest of the panel as well if they have any questions at this point to ask me as we switch over. All right, so I'm switching over to early case assessment. It's a web-based application. You're going to be looking at the application just running in my browser. And as I mentioned, the first step that we typically go through working with legal is to determine the custodians for any given case. And so there are a few custodians that I actually already have listed here. And I think one of the most important things to understand about early case assessment is that it gives us the ability to do exploration of content and collection of content on a per custodian basis, which is typically the way that legal has been working to date. And the important part of it is that from a data source perspective, we're doing this on a per custodian basis and not necessarily having to incur the expense of trying to index the entire organization when it comes to trying to search. We're doing it much more in the way that legal has continued to work from paper days moving forward, which is do that assessment of the key custodians and understand their data sources. So I'm just going to use myself, Stephen Ludlow, as a key custodian here. And to understand the data sources for this user, we would click on associated data sources to see the ones that have been added. So Stephen has a number of different data sources that have been added already. And what we can do...
Hello?
Hi there. I think we lost Stephen, so what we can do maybe is just wait a few minutes and see if he's able to join again.
Well, I think we can talk about a few items while we're waiting, if you want. I think that Stephen made a really good point. It was one of the things that came up before, and that is, you can't emphasize this too much, regardless of who's involved, is once you identify these custodians and once you are looking at the data sources of information, there is a certain level of follow-up. There's a certain level of process that has to be done. It's not all use of technology. There is some actual human interface that has to go on, that has to be dealt with to make sure. But you can see how the tools here make the job so much easier by being able to track and not just take somebody's word for where the information and the document lies.
Well, and in order to, you saw that Stephen already had preset those custodians. I mean, that goes back to what we talked about initially, which is why you need this plan put in place so that you, in fact, do know who those people are. Again, worst scenario is that you don't have that information, and then you've got a suit.
And as we said before, then the next step is to make sure that the technology folks who are dealing with this aren't put in a position, as well as the custodians, to make a decision of what's kept or not kept. Again, further basis for having it centralized and having it accessible like this, so that the decisions are made from the appropriate decision makers, being the legal or the business people that are involved in the situation.
I mean, from a perspective of being a former CIO, I can tell you that IT many times has a great understanding of what's going on across the enterprise, because they have to normally maintain most of the systems that hold this data. So from that standpoint, they're a wonderful resource for legal and for business when these things occur. But again, like you say, they should not be the folks that get to decide what it is. Simply.
Hi guys, this is Steve.